As you said, one of the most basic functions of our government, doing our jobs, is to keep American families safe and secure. And for too long, Congress has put fealty to the special interests of the gun lobby ahead of our safety. Mr. Speaker, the prevalence of gun violence in our country is horrifying. For 15 to 24-year-olds, the gun murder rate here in America is 49 times higher than our peer nations. Our children and my children go to school with the fear that their school, that their classroom, could be the next mass shooting site. Guns are the second leading cause of death for our American children and teens. Nearly 1,700 children are killed by guns each year. Our country's gun violence epidemic is not normal. While we have about 5% of the world's population, we have about 15% of non-combat related gun violence. The fact is that no other country on this planet even remotely comes close to ours on the problem of gun violence. It has been almost a year since the Parkland school shooting and over 6 years since the Sandy Hook shooting. And until this Congress, there has not been any change coming out of Washington. Yesterday, we took an important first step. As my colleague, Mr. Cicilline, recognized, the House held its first hearing in 8 years on taking action to prevent gun violence in America. And it is a shame, Mr. Speaker, that it took 8 years to hold that hearing. Next week will be the markup of historic legislation, H.R. 8, the bipartisan background check bill. Now, more than ever, we need to insist that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle stand up to the gun lobby and stand up to join in the fight to end gun violence. 6 of the deadliest mass shootings in our nation's entire history happened in the last decade, a decade in which Congress did nothing to reduce preventable gun deaths. We cannot continue, we should not continue to ignore the demands of mothers, of grandmothers, of grandparents, of teachers, of nurses, of emergency room physicians who are concerned, like all of us, about violent gun deaths and about children being killed in their schools and in their communities. We need to be leaders, not shills for the gun lobby, not cowards afraid of losing an A rating. Our children deserve courage. They deserve the courage of this Congress. Our children deserve leaders who will fight to ensure that families are safe at school, at movie theaters, at concerts. I will not be bought, and I will not be silenced by the gun lobby or by the president. The midterm elections made clear that voters want lawmakers to put the safety of our children and our families first. We must end the insidious buying off of politicians by the gun lobby. Americans overwhelmingly support common sense gun safety reforms, like H.R. 8, which implements mandatory background checks on all gun sales and transfers. 97% of Americans want laws like this implemented. Since the Brady Bill was passed 25 years ago, over 3 million attempts to purchase firearms have been blocked because of background checks. Yet 1 out of 5 guns is still sold without a background check. We also need commitment and action by Congress to reinstate CDC, Center for Disease Control, funding to study how best to prevent gun violence. More than 3/4 of Americans support the CDC conducting research on gun violence as a public health issue. Yet for decades, Republicans in Congress have prevented us from studying the factors that contribute to accidental deaths, suicides, and homicides by firearms. And without that information, without that research, we cannot have a full understanding of how to exercise our duty to keep American families safe and to prevent unnecessary loss of life. These are not radical ideas. They are common sense American solutions that are being held hostage by the gun lobby. My home, Orange County, has made its feelings heard time and again that it wants to strengthen gun violence prevention laws. Keeping our families safe is at the heart of our values. I am particularly inspired by the advocacy of those in our community who have experienced loss and suffering from gun violence, and yet found the strength to dedicate their lives to making sure that others don't experience similar tragedies. I'd like to highlight the story of one such couple, Mary Lee and Charlie Bleck from Orange County, California. These loving parents led the fight in my district and in California for common sense gun legislation. Mary Lee and Charlie's son, Matthew, was only 21 years old when he was shot and killed. He was a victim of an armed robbery by teens using a small handgun, also known as a Saturday night special or a junk gun. In memory of their son, the Blecks founded the Orange County Citizens for the Prevention of Gun Violence in 1995. For 5 long, hard-fought years, they advocated for safety regulations that would rid California of the type of gun that killed their son, and they succeeded. California used to produce 80% of the junk guns for the nation. California no longer produces these junk guns and has enacted safety standards for handguns that are working to reduce gun violence deaths. Still today, the Blecks are vigilant in preventing the gun lobby from finding new ways to sell dangerous handguns in California. They now lead the Orange County chapter of the Brady Campaign to prevent gun violence. And I am personally very grateful for their efforts, their leadership, and their courage. No family should ever have to go through what the Blecks suffered. But too many in our own communities have. Since the beginning of 2014, in California, over 14,000 people, 14,000 people, including 120 law enforcement officers, have been injured or killed from gun violence. 47 of those people hurt or killed were in my district, the 45th district. We have lost 34 members of our communities in just 4 years, all to gun violence. This is a public safety problem, and Mr. Speaker, doing nothing is unacceptable. This issue affects all of us, young and old alike. Just last week, I received 60 letters from constituents living at Heritage Point, a senior community, each letter asking me to take action to prevent so many senseless deaths. These letters said, and I quote, "Most of us have families, children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. We have much anguish due to the recent and terrible shootings taking place almost in our own backyard. Gun violence destroys families and communities. We must work together to keep dangerous weapons out of the hands of dangerous people. We cannot allow the frequent news of gun violence to desensitize us into believing it's the norm. It's not the norm, and it's not unavoidable. There is something we can do to prevent gun violence. If Congress puts people first, people ahead of the gun lobby, we can save hundreds of lives each year. Our role as elected representatives is to prioritize and fight for the well-being of our constituents and our communities, not the score we are assigned by the gun lobby. Standing up to powerful special interests is a radical transformation of how Congress operates, but that change is long overdue. We need commitment and action by Congress to pass common sense gun laws like H.R. 8 to expand background checks. We need to fund CDC research on firearms and the impacts of gun violence. Without Congress's action, if we simply offer thoughts and prayers but do nothing, our children, our families, our communities will increasingly suffer from preventable injuries, preventable suicides, and preventable homicides, preventable shooting massacres, and the fear and trauma associated with gun violence. Gun violence is an epidemic, and we can no longer afford to point fingers or to place blame. We must act. On both sides of the aisle, we must have the courage to fight gun violence for the common good of the American people.